us. Today's stories are stories about a pushy God and about people who say yes to that pushing. These are stories that are good for Lent. These are stories that are good for any time of year. And as we were talking about these stories in Bible study on Tuesday, we came to the conclusion that no saint really had a comfortable life. And it wasn't because they were living a hermit, ascetic-like lifestyle somewhere out in the desert, but rather because they were saying yes to God and allowing themselves to be pushed by the Spirit into places that they didn't know, into things that they didn't think they could handle. They were saying yes to the nagging urges. They were stepping out in trust rather than holding on in fear. Stepping out in trust, like our stories today. The first story that we have today is the story of Abram from Genesis. Abram saying yes to God. The last line of it, so Abram went as the Lord had told him. The next line, which we don't have in our text today, says that Abram was 75 years old when this happened. We are never too old to say yes to God. Now, Abram went first because he trusted God. Now, God also made some pretty nice promises to Abram. I will bless you, I will make your name great, etc., etc. But I'm guessing Abram didn't get those promises in writing, signed by a notary, witnessed by 3 witnesses. Abram responded by saying yes and went where the Spirit led. Part of the challenge in responding to God this way is that with God, we never know the whole story. Now, it's our natural tendency to try to figure out as much as we can before making a decision. That's probably a good thing. But if we really knew what the entire journey would entail, we would probably never leave the terminal. Again, we're incarcerated by fear, trapped by the oh-no's and the what-ifs. But Abram responded with the freedom of hope, the freedom to say yes to a journey that he would not fully know until he lived it out. God would say to Abram later, and says to us over and over again, do not be afraid. It is the most repeated line in the Bible. God must constantly remind us not to get trapped by our fears. Then the gospel story today shows us another way of saying yes today. Nicodemus. Nicodemus was this teacher and this leader of the Jews. But he saw the teaching of Jesus and he sensed in it some kind of greater truth, some real power. And it made him uncomfortable. It wasn't what he was teaching. It wasn't what he'd been saying. It wasn't what he'd learned. It was something different. And his fear was evident. He came to Jesus not in the marketplace, not in the synagogue, but under the cover of darkness. Came in the night. He might be wrong. In trusting God, we have to know that we might be wrong and know that we might be right all at the same time and still let go. Now, Nicodemus took this risk to go see Jesus. You would think Jesus would give him a straightforward answer, but that is not the case. Jesus continued to make Nicodemus uncomfortable. Jesus continued to push. The wind blows where it chooses, and you hear the sound of it, but you do not know where it comes from or where it goes. That was part of Jesus' response. The Spirit is this wind that pushes us and makes us change. Sometimes it is a gale force or hurricane force wind, and we can't stay where we are. But more often than not, it's a slight, gentle breeze that we can barely feel. Now, when the wind is outside, we have all kinds of ways to bundle up against it or to go inside and hide from it. And I think we do the same thing with the wind of the Spirit sometimes, trying to hide from where it's leading us. We like the idea of protection more than the idea of change. But we have a choice. We have a choice. We can live trapped in the fear of where we are, or we can let go and see where the Spirit leads us, trusting in God and living in hope. In this season of Lent, our comfort is unimportant. Our growth is vital. Our discomfort can lead us to growth if we say yes to God. So I want to end with an image of wind. Think about a kite floating in the air. If it were not for the unseen wind, it would go nowhere. But because of that wind, it can soar. On the ground, the kite is safe. In the air, it is at risk. On the ground, it is a small world which the kite surveys. Up in the air, the world is greater. It's big and it's grand. On the ground, it's comfortable and safe. But in the air, it is pushed and challenged. We can stay comfortably where we are, or we can allow God to push us. In the uncomfortable silence that will follow this sermon, I urge you to think a minute. Think about where you're uncomfortable and why. What are the fears that lurk in the shadows, holding us firmly where we are? What would happen if we trusted and let go to God? What would happen if we broke out of the incarceration of fear and lived into the freedom of hope? Where would your journey with God take you?